The moment the car door shut, I felt it. That strange tension you can't explain but can't ignore. His eyes met mine in the rear-view mirror, and suddenly I knew this ride home wasn't going to be just a ride. By the time we pulled into my driveway, I wasn't the same woman my husband had kissed goodbye. It started as one of those perfectly ordinary afternoons, the kind where you expect nothing more than the usual small talk and the predictable ride home. My husband had been out of town for work, and I'd gone to a mutual friend's barbecue just to pass the time. I wasn't looking for excitement, and certainly not trouble. That's when Daniel, my husband's oldest friend, offered to give me a lift. It wasn't strange. He'd driven me before when my husband was busy. He was charming in that easy, confident way that made people naturally relax around him. But that day, there was something else in the air. As I climbed into the passenger seat, I noticed the way his gaze lingered just a little too long. His hand brushed mine when I reached for the seatbelt. It wasn't accidental, or maybe it was, but the jolt it sent through me felt anything but casual. The car smelled faintly of his cologne, warm and rich, and for a moment I was hyper-aware of the small space we were sharing. He started the engine, the hum filling the silence between us, and when he asked how I'd been, it wasn't the polite "how are you" you give a neighbor. It was slower, deeper, like he really wanted to know. We hadn't even left the neighborhood before my pulse was racing, and somewhere in the pit of my stomach, I knew this ride home was going to take me somewhere I hadn't planned on going both on the road. And in my life, we rolled out of the driveway and into the fading golden light of late afternoon. Daniel's hand rested loosely on the wheel, his other arm draped casually over the console, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. At first, we talked about safe topics, the barbecue, work, a movie he'd seen, but with each mile the conversation shifted. He started asking questions that cut past the surface. "Are you happy?" he asked at one point, eyes flicking toward me before returning to the road. I laughed lightly, trying to brush it off, of course. Why wouldn't I be? His smirk told me he wasn't convinced. Sometimes people say that because they think it's what they're supposed to say. My breath caught in my chest. There was something dangerous about how easily he could strip away the polite armor I wore for everyone else. We were only 10 minutes from my house when he slowed unexpectedly and took a turn that wasn't on the usual route. My eyebrows rose. "This isn't the way home," I said, my voice somewhere between curious and cautious. He glanced at me, that same unreadable smile tugging at his lips. "I know. I thought you might want to take the scenic route, get some air, away from everything for a bit." I should have insisted we stick to the normal path. I should have, but instead I leaned back in my seat, my heart drumming against my ribs, and let him take me somewhere I didn't recognize in more ways than one. The road narrowed into a shaded lane, the kind you'd only find if you knew exactly where you were going. Tall trees leaned over us, their branches stitching together to block most of the light. The world outside the car felt quieter, heavier, as if it was holding its breath. Daniel's voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. "You ever feel like you're stuck, like you've been living the same day on repeat?" I swallowed, my fingers tracing the seam of the leather seat. "Sometimes," I admitted, surprising myself with how easily the truth slipped out. He gave a slow nod, his jaw tightening. "That's the thing about routines. They make you safe, but they also make you numb." Something about the way he said it, like he wasn't just talking about himself, made my pulse race. We passed a small clearing. I caught a glimpse of a still pond, the glassy surface catching what little sunlight broke through. Daniel eased the car to the side and turned off the engine. "Thought you might like this place," he said, his eyes finding mine. No one comes here, ever. The quiet between us was thick now, weighted with possibilities I didn't want to name. I could feel the thin line between innocent and dangerous pressing closer, and deep down I already knew which side of that line we were about to cross. The moment the engine cut, the silence wrapped around us, not awkward, but charged, like the air before a storm. Daniel leaned back in his seat, one arm draped casually over the steering wheel, the other resting on the center console, so close I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. "This place is beautiful," I murmured, glancing toward the pond, though my focus kept dragging back to him. He smirked, but it wasn't cocky, it was knowing. "It's not the place," he said softly. "It's the company." I felt the compliment land deeper than I wanted to admit. I should have laughed it off, changed the subject, but instead my hand stayed right there on my lap, dangerously close to his. When his fingers brushed mine, it wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, slow, and testing. My breath caught, but I didn't pull away. "You're shaking," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not." I lied, though I knew he could feel the tremor. The world outside the car faded. The water, the trees, the sunlight, they were all just background to the magnetic pull between us. And when his hand finally slid over mine, lacing his fingers with mine like it was the most natural thing in the world, I knew we had stepped past the point of no return. He didn't let go. His thumb traced lazy circles over my knuckles, sending little jolts of heat up my arm. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, loud and reckless. Daniel shifted in his seat, turning his body toward me. The way his gaze locked onto mine felt like he was peeling away every excuse I could possibly hide behind. "You know," he said, his voice low and slow. "I've thought about this before." I swallowed hard. "About what?" "This, us being here, alone." The air between us was so tight it was almost suffocating, but I couldn't pull back. Instead, I leaned in just slightly, enough to catch the scent of his cologne, warm, woodsy, and completely intoxicating. When he lifted his free hand to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear, his fingertips brushed my cheek, and I swear my entire body reacted. I wasn't supposed to feel this way, but in that moment, all the boundaries I'd built over years of marriage felt paper thin. "You should stop," I whispered. "Do you want me to?" His question hung there, daring me to answer honestly. And my silence was all the permission he needed. He leaned closer, his face just inches from mine. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my lips, each second stretching into an eternity. "Daniel," I murmured, but it wasn't a protest. It was a warning I didn't mean. His eyes searched mine, almost like he was giving me one last chance to pull away. I didn't. The first brush of his lips against mine was barely there, soft, testing, almost fragile. But then, like a spark catching dry kindling, it deepened. His hand slid to the back of my neck, holding me there, drawing me in as if letting go would be impossible. Every nerve in my body lit up. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched the rush of blood in my ears. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice screamed that this was wrong. But that voice was drowned out by the heat of his mouth, the taste of him, the way his fingers traced patterns along my jaw like he'd memorized me long before this moment. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "I shouldn't have done that," he whispered. I nodded, but my hand was still on his chest, feeling the wild beat of his heart. And I wasn't moving it away. His hand lingered at the base of my neck, his thumb brushing slow circles against my skin, grounding me and unraveling me all at once. "We should stop," I said, though my voice came out soft. Almost pleading. "Do you want me to?" he asked. The silence that followed was the loudest answer I could have given. In that suspended moment, the air between us felt heavy, thick with everything we'd been holding back for far too long. My pulse thundered in my ears, and when he leaned in again, I didn't just let him. I met him halfway. This kiss wasn't testing. It was hungry. His hands slid down my sides, pulling me closer until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. My fingers tangled in his shirt, clutching it like it was the only thing keeping me upright. We broke apart for a second, both gasping for air, but neither of us moved away. His forehead rested against mine again, his breath warm and uneven. "If I take you upstairs right now," he began, voice low, "there's no undoing it." My heart skipped, then pounded harder. I could hear the danger in his words, but I could also hear the promise. "I know," I whispered. "And I'm still here." His jaw tightened, a flicker of something dark in his eyes. Want, need, maybe even regret. But he took my hand and started leading me toward the stairs. With every step, the sound of my own heartbeat was louder than my thoughts. We both knew we'd crossed the point of no return. The stairs creaked under our weight, each sound echoing in my chest like a warning I couldn't bring myself to heed. His hand stayed wrapped firmly around mine, not giving me a chance to hesitate, not giving either of us the space to reconsider. When we reached the top, he pushed open the first door on the left. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow from a lamp in the corner. It smelled faintly of cedar wood and something warm. He didn't let go of my hand. Instead, he pulled me in, shutting the door behind us with a quiet click that sounded more like a lock on my resolve than anything else. I stood there for a moment, my back to the door, my breath catching in my throat. He stepped closer, and the way his eyes traveled over me, slow, deliberate, made my knees feel weak. "You're shaking," he said, his voice low but filled with something between concern and desire. "Because I know I shouldn't be here," I replied, my voice trembling. "Then tell me to stop," he whispered. I didn't. He stepped forward until his chest brushed mine, his hand coming up to cup my jaw, tilting my head toward him. The warmth of his touch contrasted with the cool air of the room, making every nerve in my body sharpen. When he kissed me this time, it was deep, unrestrained, like he was claiming something he'd been denied for far too long. My hands slid up his arms, feeling the strength in them as he held me closer. He guided me backward until I felt the edge of the bed behind my knees. My body tipped slightly, but before I could fall, he caught me, his gaze locking with mine. "This is your choice," he said, giving me that one final out, and I chose not to take it. The air between us thickened, each breath feeling heavier than the last. I could hear the faint hum of a heater somewhere in the house, but all my focus was on him, on the way his eyes searched mine, as if waiting for one last flicker of doubt. It never came. He leaned in again, slower this time, his lips brushing against mine like a question he already knew the answer to. My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could feel it through my chest. His hands slid to my waist, fingers pressing gently but firmly, guiding me backward until the bed caught me completely. I sank onto it, my pulse racing, my mind screaming at me to remember the vows I had made. But my body wanted something else entirely. He knelt in front of me, his hands resting on my knees before slowly parting them. The look in his eyes wasn't just desire, it was hunger, as if this moment had been building in his mind for far longer than I could imagine. When his touch finally traveled up my thigh, I felt a shiver ripple through my entire body. My breath hitched, my voice catching somewhere between a gasp and his name. "This can't be right," I whispered, though my hands betrayed me by tangling into his hair. "Then stop me," he murmured, his lips now brushing just beneath my ear. But again, I didn't. The room felt smaller, the world quieter, as if nothing existed beyond the four walls we were in. And in that suspended reality, I let myself forget the consequences, forget the faces of the people who trusted me, forget everything except the way he was making me feel in that moment. And then we crossed it, the point where there's no taking it back. When it was over, the silence was deafening. No music, no footsteps outside, no sound except the frantic beating of my own heart. I sat there, still catching my breath, my hair a tangled mess, the sheets warm beneath me. He lay back, his chest rising and falling slowly, looking far too calm for what had just happened. I couldn't stop staring at the ceiling, as if maybe the right words were written up there somewhere, words that could explain why I had let this happen. But there was nothing, just the dull beige paint and the weight pressing on my chest. That was. He began, but I cut him off with a shake of my head. "Don't," I whispered, "just don't." I stood, pulling my clothes back on with shaky hands, avoiding his gaze like it would burn me. My legs still felt weak, not just from what we had done, but from the realization of it. I thought of my husband, his smile, the trust in his eyes when he introduced me to his friend. I thought of how, in a single night, I had destroyed something that took years to build. And yet, there was another thought, buried deeper, one I didn't want to admit even to myself. A part of me had wanted it, not just in the heat of the moment, but long before tonight. When I finally looked at him, he was already watching me, his expression unreadable. "Are you going to tell him?" he asked quietly. My throat tightened. "No," I said, more to convince myself than him. "No one can ever know." But as I grabbed my coat and stepped toward the door, I knew that the secret wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was that a piece of me wanted to do it again. The ride home was quiet, but not in the comfortable way. The hum of the car's engine seemed louder than usual, every bump in the road jolting me out of my thoughts. I kept my eyes fixed on the passing streetlights. Counting them like that would somehow make the silence easier to bear. When we pulled up in front of my house, he cut the engine but didn't move to get out. "You'll be okay?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I nodded, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "Yeah, thanks for the ride." The words were almost laughable, considering what that ride had turned into. As I stepped out, the cold air hit me, but it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled in my chest. My husband was inside, probably sitting on the couch, waiting for me. I unlocked the door, stepped in, and there he was, exactly as I pictured. He glanced up from the TV, smiling. "Hey, you're back," he said, like nothing in the world had changed. But for me, everything had. Over the next few days, I thought I could just bury it, pretend it never happened. I was careful, overly careful. I laughed when I needed to, answered questions without hesitation, kept my phone face down so I wouldn't accidentally see his name. But it's funny how secrets start to grow roots. One night, my husband invited him over for a football game. When our eyes met across the living room, my chest tightened. We spoke in short sentences, barely making eye contact. My husband didn't notice, but I did. And I could feel the pull again, the same pull that had gotten me into this mess in the first place. The worst part, he knew it too. I saw it in the way his gaze lingered just a little too long. That night, the air between us was suffocating. Every time my husband laughed at something on TV, I could feel his eyes on me. It wasn't obvious, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I noticed. When the game ended, my husband excused himself to take a phone call in the kitchen. And that's when it happened. He leaned in just slightly, his voice low enough so only I could hear. "You've been avoiding me," he said, and there was no accusation in his tone, only quiet certainty. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Because I have to." "You don't want to," he replied, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Before I could answer, my husband's voice echoed from the kitchen. "Babe, "Can you grab more drinks from the fridge?" I stood, grateful for the excuse, but he followed me. The fridge door opened, light spilling across the dim kitchen. I reached for the cans, but his hand brushed mine, lingering, deliberate. It was such a small thing, but the heat of that touch burned right through me. When I turned to leave, he stepped in closer. His breath was warm against my ear. "This isn't over," he whispered. I should have said something. I should have pushed him away. But instead, I walked back into the living room with my hands shaking, because deep down I knew he was right. It was a week later when my husband's friend offered to drive me home from a mutual gathering. My husband had left earlier for work, trusting him without a second thought. The car ride started in comfortable silence, streetlights flickering across the dashboard, the hum of the tires on the road. But that tension from before, it was back, heavier than ever. Halfway home, he pulled over on a quiet side street. I remember my breath catching as he turned off the engine. "I've been thinking about you all week," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. I knew this was the moment I should stop him, should remind him, and myself, of the lines we couldn't cross. But instead, I sat frozen as he reached out, his fingers tracing lightly over my knee. "You feel this too?" he murmured. It wasn't a question. I hated how right he was. My body betrayed me with every shiver, every unsteady breath. He leaned closer, and for a second, the world outside that car didn't exist. No marriage, no friendship, just heat, danger, and a pull I couldn't explain. When his lips finally met mine, it wasn't gentle. It was the release of weeks of tension, wrong, reckless, and electric. And as the night swallowed us whole, I knew there was no turning back. When he finally started the car again, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the hum of the engine. Neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was loaded. By the time we pulled into my driveway, my hands were shaking. He put the car in park but didn't look at me right away. "You know this changes everything," he said quietly. I forced a weak laugh, trying to play it off. It was just the moment, but we both knew it wasn't. As I reached for the door handle, he caught my wrist, his thumb brushing the inside like he wanted to memorize the feel of me. "If you want this to be the last time," he said, "say it now." I opened my mouth, ready to end it before it began. But nothing came out. The truth was, I didn't want it to be the last time. I stepped out of the car without answering. My husband was home, sitting in the living room, smiling like nothing in our lives had shifted. I smiled back, but inside, I knew I was carrying a secret that would burn everything down if it ever came out. And that night, lying beside him, I kept replaying the feeling of someone else's hands on me, wondering when I'd feel them again. The next few days were torture. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a jolt of adrenaline, half fear, half excitement, wondering if it was him. When his name finally lit up my screen, I didn't hesitate to open the message. "Thinking about you. When can we talk?" I stared at those words for a long time, biting my lip. I knew the smart answer was never, but my fingers typed before my brain could catch up. "Tonight. Call me after 9. That evening, I told my husband I was tired and headed upstairs early. I shut the bedroom door, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark, waiting. When my phone rang, I answered on the first ring. I can't stop replaying that night. He said, his voice low and rough, "You have no idea what you've done to me." My heart was racing again, just like in his car. "You think I'm not feeling the same?" I whispered. There was a pause, and then he asked, "What if I told you I'm free tomorrow afternoon, and I can't stand the thought of not seeing you?" I knew exactly what he meant. And I also knew if I said yes, there would be no going back. The next day felt like I was living two separate lives. One where I was the dutiful wife making breakfast, smiling at my husband as he left for work, and another where my pulse was thundering at the thought of 2:00 p.m. I kept glancing at the clock, my hands trembling every time the minutes ticked closer. When I heard a car pull into the driveway, my breath caught. It was him. I opened the door, and for a moment we just stared at each other. The air between us was so heavy it felt like it might collapse. "You look unbelievable," he murmured, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The click of the door closing behind him sounded like the seal on a secret neither of us could ever undo. We didn't speak for long. Words weren't needed. The moment his fingers brushed my arm, my resolve cracked completely. I told myself I'd only let him kiss me, just a kiss, but his hands were firm, his breath hot against my skin, and before I could think, before I could even remind myself I was married, we were past the point of no return. When it was over, I sat there, heart pounding, trying to catch my breath. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. He stood up first, straightening his shirt like it was just another ordinary afternoon. But for me, everything felt different now, heavier. As he walked me to the door, his hand brushed the small of my back, sending a shiver through me. "You know this isn't the last time," he whispered, and the terrifying part was, I didn't want it to be. The drive back to my house was a blur. The world outside looked the same, people walking their dogs, kids playing in front yards, but inside my reality had shifted. Pulling into my driveway, I saw my husband's car parked at the curb. My stomach twisted. I forced a smile as I got out of the car, praying my face didn't give me away. He greeted me casually, but his eyes lingered on mine, like he sensed something, and in that moment I realized keeping this secret would be harder than I ever imagined. That night at dinner, my husband barely touched his food. He kept watching me between bites, like he was trying to read my thoughts. "Everything okay?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound casual. He nodded slowly, but there was a pause, a hesitation that made my pulse race. "Yeah, just tired," he said, but his tone carried weight. I couldn't tell if it was suspicion or something else, but the air between us felt thicker than usual. Later, when I went to load the dishwasher, I caught him standing in the hallway, arms crossed, still watching me. It was unsettling. It was like he knew. Or maybe he was just guessing, testing my reactions. I smiled at him again, the same fake smile I'd practiced 1,000 times in front of the mirror as a teenager. But inside, my chest felt tight, like the walls of my own home were closing in on me. And when I went to bed that night, lying next to him in the dark, I couldn't stop thinking about the way his friend's voice had sounded when he whispered to me. The memory wasn't fading, it was burning brighter. 2 days later, it happened again. I was folding laundry in the living room when my phone buzzed. It was a text from him, my husband's friend. "I'm driving past your neighborhood. Need a ride anywhere?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I should have typed no. I should have deleted the message without thinking, but instead I wrote, "Just got some errands." 10 minutes later, his car pulled up outside. I could see him through the window, leaning back in the driver's seat, one hand draped over the wheel, that same calm, confident smirk on his face. When I slid into the passenger seat, the air felt charged, just like last time. We didn't say much at first, but his eyes kept flicking toward me, and every glance felt heavier than the last. Halfway to the store, he turned down a side street. "This isn't the way," I said softly. "I know," he replied, and the way he said it, it wasn't a mistake, it was a promise. The road narrowed, lined with tall oak trees whose branches hung low, creating a tunnel of shadows. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. He didn't speak until the houses disappeared from view. Then he slowed the car and pulled into a small, empty parking lot beside a lake. The water shimmered in the fading light, but my focus was on him. He turned to me, his elbow resting casually on the steering wheel, his gaze intense. I couldn't stop thinking about the other night. He said, voice low, almost a whisper, my chest tightened. Part of me wanted to remind him that my husband, his friend, trusted both of us. But another part, the part I didn't want to admit existed, wanted to hear what he'd say next. "You keep looking at me like that," he continued, leaning closer, "and we both know where this is going." The air between us thickened. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, brushing over mine. It was the smallest touch, but it sent a jolt through me like electricity. The decision was mine, and I knew, if I didn't speak now, I might never be able to go back. I wish I could say I stopped him. I wish I could say I remembered my vows, the life my husband and I built, the trust we shared, but the truth is, I didn't. That night, sitting in his car by the lake, the pull between us was stronger than my conscience. It started with that single touch, then a kiss, slow at first, like we were testing the water, then desperate, like we both knew it couldn't last. The world outside that car faded away. When it was over, silence wrapped around us. He started the engine without a word, and the hum of the tires on the road was the only sound on the way back. I stared out the window, replaying every second, feeling the weight of what I had just done. When we pulled up to my house, the porch light was on. My husband opened the door with a smile, completely unaware of the betrayal parked just outside his home. I smiled back, kissed him on the cheek, and carried a secret I knew would change everything if it ever came out. It's been weeks now, and he hasn't said a word about that night. But every time I see my husband and his friend laughing together, I feel the same knot in my stomach. Because no matter how well I hide it, I know what happened, and I know it can never happen again. Or maybe I just keep telling myself that. I stepped out of his car that night feeling like my entire world had shifted. My husband was inside, probably waiting to ask how the drive home was, while I was still trying to steady my breath and slow my racing heart. The truth, that ride wasn't just a ride. It was a moment I never should have allowed. The way his hand lingered on mine, the way his voice softened when he called me beautiful, it was dangerous, addictive. When I walked through the door, my husband looked at me like nothing had changed. And maybe, to him, nothing had, but inside me, everything had. His friend still comes around sometimes, sharing beers and laughs with my husband like nothing happened. And every time, I feel the weight of that night pressing down on me, daring me to either confess or bury it deeper. I tell myself it was a mistake, one I'll never repeat, but the hardest part, some nights when it's quiet, I'm not sure if I regret it, or if a part of me wants it to happen again.